Robbie, tell us what's on your radar.
Well, maybe you saw the headlines last week. According to the mainstream media, so many people are overdosing on ivermectin, an anti-parasite drug promoted by vaccine skeptics as a possible treatment for COVID-19, that rural hospitals are overwhelmed with poison cases. The situation is so dire in Oklahoma that medical staff are exhausted. They're running out of ambulances and hospital beds, and doctors are so busy with ivermectin overdose patients that they don't even have time to treat gunshot wounds. This incredible story was first reported by a local news channel, KFOR, and then appeared at Newsweek, Rolling Stone, the New York Daily News, The Guardian, and elsewhere. Numerous high-profile media figures, including MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, tweeted about ivermectin overdoses straining Oklahoma hospitals. The implication being that the right-wing embrace of a crank COVID-19 cure was dangerous, not only for the people who consumed it, but for the stability of the entire medical system. Now, there's just one problem with this story. It's completely false. Its entire central premise, ivermectin overdoses are straining Oklahoma hospitals, was simply made up and gullibly recirculated by a lazy, unthinking mainstream media, all too willing to believe the very worst about the lowly rubes. For Maddow and her ilk, it just sounds correct to them that there will be so many reckless right-wing people ingesting ivermectin, contrary to official guidance, that hospitals are flailing. The common people, unlike the discerning viewers of MSNBC, are stubborn and uneducated. That's the media's bias, thinking they always know better than you. Well, this viral hoax should serve as yet another wake-up call. Now, the trouble began with KFOR's Caitlin Ogle, who ran a story with the headline, "Patients Overdosing on Ivermectin Backing Up Rural Oklahoma Hospitals and Ambulances." The meat of the story was a series of quotes from an Oklahoma doctor, Jason McElya, who appears to attribute overcrowding at local hospitals to a deluge of ivermectin overdoses. Here's what McElya told Ogle.
The ERs are so backed up that gunshot victims were having hard times getting to facilities where they could get definitive care and be treated.
Something McElya says is now backing up small-town ambulance systems, too.
All of their ambulances are stuck at the hospital waiting for a bed to open so that they can take the patient in, and they don't have any, that's it.
Rolling Stone's version of the story quoted from McElya's interview with KFOR, but did not provide any additional reporting or independently verified information. The image that accompanied the Rolling Stone story on Twitter featured people waiting in long lines while wearing winter coats, which, by the way, does not inspire great confidence that Rolling Stone knows what season it is in Oklahoma at present, and was summarized thusly: gunshot victims left waiting as horse dewormer overdoses overwhelm Oklahoma hospitals, doctor says. Rolling Stone has now added an update at the top of the story, clarifying that there were 459 cases of ivermectin overdoses in the entire U.S. during the month of August. And though a state-by-state breakdown is not available, it would be pretty surprising if this was straining the Oklahoma medical system. That's because the state is currently experiencing a 7-day average of 1,528 hospitalizations due to COVID-19. If they're running out of beds and ambulances, it's because of the virus, not ivermectin. Now, what about the specific claim that the need to treat ivermectin overdoses had created a dearth of space for gunshot victims? In a recent article for the Tulsa World, the same doctor, McElya, was quoted as saying that he had to wait 3 hours to transfer a recent gunshot victim because the hospital ran out of room. But note that McElya does not attribute the overcrowding to ivermectin. The article actually doesn't mention the drug at all. Unsurprisingly, unvaccinated COVID-19 patients are the main culprit. One might be tempted to blame McElya for embellishing his story, for attributing hospital overcrowding to COVID-19 in one story and then blaming overdoses in another. But a closer look at the KFOR story reveals something quite startling. At no point did the doctor actually come out and say that overdoses were straining hospitals. It was the journalist, Caitlin Ogle, who added that framing. She did not respond to a request for comment, by the way. KFOR is responsible for the spin. This means, of course, that if the national media outlets had called the doctor or the hospitals, they would have easily uncovered the error. Instead, they spread it. Now, it's vital for the media to communicate correct information to the public about ivermectin. While the drug is not only used for deworming horses and is in fact prescribed to humans, overdoses can cause nasty side effects. Moreover, its viability as a COVID-19 cure is highly disputed. There's little evidence that ivermectin is an effective treatment for the virus, and a study that touted ivermectin's benefits was recently withdrawn for including fraudulent research. Now, reporters should make crystal clear that the best way to fight the COVID-19 pandemic is mass vaccination. But communicating wrong information about ivermectin overdoses works against this goal, as it is likely to convince vaccine skeptics that their skepticism is justified. Many in the mainstream media have vigorously condemned COVID-19 misinformation and called for social media sites to reduce its spread. But pandemic-related misinformation is not confined to the far-right fringes. Readers can also encounter it in the pages of Rolling Stone and the New York Times. The Associated Press recently reported that 70% of calls to Mississippi's poison hotline were from people who had taken ivermectin. Well, that was an error. The actual figure was 2%. As of this morning, many of the tweets about the strained hospital story, including Rachel Maddow's, are still up. The misinformation is coming from inside the house. You know, and this stuff just drives me crazy because the media, they get it wrong. We have such an absence of media competence right now because this local story screwed up and then it goes viral and everyone just lazily republishes the same story without doing any independent verification, which is like a sin of journalism, but it's done routinely. It's commonplace now. And this is what happens.
Right. So you have two things going on, or three things going on at once. You got the ideological blinders that are created in newsrooms, and some of them apply even to this Oklahoma paper, and then also at Rolling Stone, where if you're going to make an error, you're going to make it in the direction of the current of the way that the dominant ideology in your newsroom flows, and you're going to get away with it because there aren't going to be people kind of poking holes in it and saying, hey, what's going on here? So if she'd have pushed the other way, they'd been like, wait a minute, why don't we look closer and just see what's going on here? Then the second thing is that the way that the industry used to be is that you would work your way up through local news outlets to a national news outlet, and so you could make your mistakes at the local level, and it wouldn't become a national crisis. Like that was actually, I was taught that as a young reporter. That one of the advantages of I started out the Washington City paper, which covers doesn't cover DC politics. It covers DC politics, not national politics. And so, look, this is a place to make mistakes. I also wrote for the Bay Weekly and some other local Eastern Shore papers. You make mistakes there as you're learning as you go. If somebody had taken one of my mistakes and then just aggregated it and turned it into a national story, I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? You got to check my work. I'm 22 years old here. And then, so secondly, a lot of people haven't come through that. And so now they're getting their first jobs out of college as aggregators for these national publications. And so they're mistakenly aggregating the mistaken report, and there's nobody to check it because it aligns with the ideology.
Yeah.
And they're doing it for clicks, the social media clicks. And they often, a lot of these news organizations hire, like you say, Ryan, younger people to often do social media. And that's kind of been the trend, not realizing that now social media is one of the largest places where people get their news. So I think a lot of these newsrooms are starting to kind of shift their strategy when it comes to that and putting people who are going to double check the work in charge of these posts. But, we do see that a lot of these publications are going for clicks, and they're paying more attention to not only the ideology of their newsroom, but also just who their viewers are, who their readers are. And so they're playing to that, and they're saying, okay, this is how we're going to get eyeballs. And everybody's sort of struggling for those eyeballs and competing for those eyeballs. So, these sorts of stories just continue to circulate around, and they are completely untrue. But
it's funny,
they get away with it.
You end up missing the real story. Two real stories. One, ICUs and emergency departments all across the country are backed up. But as Robbie said, they're backed up mostly because of unvaccinated people being hospitalized with the coronavirus. And two, there are actually people overdosing on ivermectin. It's not the cause of the backup, but as the doctor said, and a hospital in Oklahoma had put out a statement last night saying, no, we have seen cases of overdoses of ivermectin, and to the extent that we have had to deal with those, then that is contributing to the backlog. But it was not accurate to say that is what's driving it, but it is a contributing factor. And if 2% of the calls in Mississippi to poison control are for ivermectin overdoses, that's a lot of calls to poison control. it's not 70%, and it's shameful that AP would report it at 70% because then it undermines the other point that, no, this is happening, and people actually do need to be careful with this stuff.
Right, and you're missing the real story that this is not, we do not have good evidence, it's being studied, that this is going to help you with COVID-19. It is important to communicate that information to the public.
I do want to push back on that a little.
Well, let's wait till we have
we're
going to have Dr. Jensen.
We're
going to have Dr. Jensen on the show later today. Inconclusive means there's not a whole lot of evidence. Yeah.
All right, next up on Rising, Team Rising joins us. Please stay tuned. Thanks.